It is 12:41 a.m. A Boeing 777 pushes back from the gate at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The aircraft is large, modern, one of the safest planes ever built. On board, 227 passengers and 12 crew members. Families. Business people. Students. A group of engineers returning home after a conference. The destination, Beijing. A 6-hour flight. Routine. The plane takes off without incident. Climbs to cruising altitude. Air traffic control confirms contact. Everything is normal. At 1:19 a.m., the co-pilot speaks his final words to air traffic control. Good night. Malaysian 370. And then, silence. No mayday. No distress signal. No emergency squawk. No final transmission. Nothing. Flight MH370, carrying 239 human beings, simply ceased to exist on every radar screen in Southeast Asia. That was March 8, 2014. 11 years have passed. The plane has never been found. And the 239 people on board have never come home. This is not a story about a plane crash. This is a story about the most sophisticated, most funded, most technologically advanced aviation investigation in human history, and how it failed to find a Boeing 777 the size of a city block. This is the story of MH370. And by the end of this video, you will understand why it still haunts every person who has ever looked at the sky. Every day, more than 100,000 commercial flights take off around the world. Most of them land without incident. Most of them are forgotten the moment the wheels touch the ground. MH370 was supposed to be one of those flights. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was a scheduled service operated by a Boeing 777-200ER, extended range. It was built in 2002. It had logged thousands of hours in the air. It was considered an exceptionally reliable aircraft. The flight was commanded by Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old. A veteran pilot with 18,365 flight hours to his name. By any measure, one of the most experienced commercial pilots in Asia. He had worked for Malaysia Airlines for over 33 years. Beside him sat First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, 27. Young, but competent. He was actually on his final training flight before being certified as a fully qualified co-pilot. It was, in every sense, supposed to be a milestone in his career. The night of March 7 blended into the early hours of March 8, passengers boarded. Luggage was loaded. The manifest was checked. Everything was in order. At 12:41 a.m. local time, the aircraft pushed back from gate C1. At 12:42 a.m., it began taxiing. At 12:53 a.m., it took off from runway 32R. The plane climbed into a clear night sky over Kuala Lumpur, banked northeast, and headed toward the South China Sea. Everything was completely normal. For the next 38 minutes, air traffic control tracked MH370 without incident through Malaysian airspace. At 1:01 a.m., the plane reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. At 1:07 a.m., the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, ACARS, sent its last automated data transmission. This system broadcasts engine performance data and other technical information at regular intervals. The data showed nothing unusual. The engines were performing normally. The aircraft systems were functioning as expected. The next ACARS transmission was scheduled for 1:37 a.m. It never came. At 1:19 a.m. and 30 seconds, Malaysian Air Traffic Control called MH370 to hand over radio contact to Ho Chi Minh City Control, which manages Vietnamese airspace. The response came from the cockpit, calm, professional, unhurried. "Good night. Malaysian 370. Those were the last words ever heard from the flight. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., something happened that should have been impossible. The transponder, the device that broadcasts the plane's identity, altitude, and position to air traffic control radar, was switched off. Not failed. Not malfunctioned. Switched off. This is not something that happens by accident. There is no turbulence that turns off a transponder. There is no electrical fault that selectively disables that system while leaving everything else running. Turning off the transponder requires a deliberate, manual action in the cockpit. Someone in that cockpit chose to disappear. When MH370's transponder went dark, air traffic controllers in Malaysia and Vietnam both noticed the loss of signal. But here is where something extraordinary happened, and something that would define the entire investigation. Malaysian military radar was still tracking MH370. Primary radar, unlike the secondary system that relies on the transponder, bounces a signal off the physical aircraft and receives the echo back. It does not need the plane's cooperation to work. And it was painting a very clear picture. After the transponder went dark, MH370 did not descend. It did not break apart. It did not crash into the South China Sea. It turned. The plane made a sharp turn to the left, a U-turn, and flew back across the Malay Peninsula. It crossed over the Malaysian mainland. It flew near the town of Penang, a city the captain knew well, he had grown up near there. And then it continued northwest, out over the Strait of Malacca. Military radar tracked it until 2:22 a.m., when it disappeared beyond the radar's maximum range. At that point, MH370 was over the Andaman Sea, still at altitude, still flying. The question that would torment investigators for years was already forming. Where was it going? For several days after the disappearance, the world assumed MH370 had gone down somewhere in the South China Sea, the area where it vanished from civilian radar. Search and rescue operations concentrated there. They found nothing. Because the plane wasn't there. Then came one of the most remarkable pieces of forensic analysis in aviation history. MH370 was equipped with a satellite communication system operated by the British company Inmarsat. This system periodically exchanges automated signals, called handshakes, with satellites in orbit, even when no one is actively using the communication system. These handshakes are routine. They happen every hour. They are not designed to be tracked. They are not designed to reveal position. But they do reveal something. Using a technique that had never been applied before in an accident investigation, Inmarsat engineers analyzed the frequency and timing of 7 handshakes received from MH370 after it disappeared. From those signals, they could determine the arc, a curved line across the Earth's surface, along which the plane must have been flying at each point in time. And the arcs told a story that nobody wanted to hear. MH370 had not crashed in the South China Sea. It had not landed anywhere in Southeast Asia. It had flown for approximately 7 hours after the last radar contact. 7 hours. And based on the satellite data, the final arc, the last known position, ran through one of the most remote, most isolated stretches of ocean on the planet. The Southern Indian Ocean. One of the deepest, stormiest, most inhospitable bodies of water on Earth. 239 people had been flying through the night while the world searched in the wrong place. What followed was the largest and most expensive underwater search in history. Australia took the lead, coordinating an international effort that would ultimately span years and cover tens of thousands of square kilometers of ocean floor. The target search area, based on the Inmarsat analysis, was a stretch of the southern Indian Ocean west of Australia, in waters reaching depths of up to 6,000 meters. Nearly 4 miles deep. In places where the ocean floor had never been mapped. Where autonomous underwater vehicles had to be programmed to navigate mountains and canyons that didn't appear on any chart. Ships combed the surface. Submarines dove to the depths. The technology deployed was cutting-edge and expensive. And for months, then years, they found nothing. In January 2017, the official underwater search was suspended. An area of 120,000 square kilometers had been searched. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been spent. The outcome, zero. No aircraft. No black boxes. No human remains. Nothing. But the ocean was not completely silent. On July 29, 2015, 515 days after the disappearance, a beach cleaner on the French island of Réunion, in the western Indian Ocean, found something washed up on the shore. It was a piece of an aircraft wing. Specifically, a flapron, a movable surface from the trailing edge of a wing. It was confirmed to be from MH370. Over the following months and years, additional pieces were found along the coastlines of eastern Africa, in Mozambique, Tanzania, South Africa, Madagascar. Pieces of fuselage. Sections of interior panels. Items believed to belong to passengers. The debris pattern was consistent with ocean drift modeling from the southern Indian Ocean. It confirmed that MH370 had gone down somewhere in that region. But it also told investigators something else. The condition of the flapron showed no signs of a high-speed impact with the water. In a controlled crash, or even an uncontrolled dive, the forces involved would typically shatter aircraft components into tiny pieces. Some of the recovered debris appeared relatively intact. This led investigators to a disturbing possibility. Was it possible that MH370 ran out of fuel, and glided, under some form of control, into the ocean? If so, where it hit the water could be very different from where it was assumed to have gone down. The search area, already enormous, might have been wrong. No investigation of this magnitude could avoid the question that haunts every unexplained aviation disaster. Who was responsible? The attention of investigators, and of the world, turned to the captain. Zahari Ahmad Shah was by all accounts a dedicated professional. Colleagues described him as meticulous, safety-conscious, deeply experienced. He had a passion for aviation that extended beyond the cockpit. He was known to operate a sophisticated flight simulator at home, and was an active member of online aviation communities. But investigators found something on that home simulator. Among the many routes Zahari had practiced and explored, as many serious flight sim enthusiasts do, there was one that stood out. A route that appeared to trace a path into the southern Indian Ocean. The route had been run approximately a month before the disappearance. Investigators also noted that Zahari's personal life showed signs of strain. Reports, never officially confirmed, suggested difficulties in his marriage. He was reportedly passionate about politics, and the day before MH370 disappeared, a prominent Malaysian opposition politician had been sentenced to prison in a verdict Zahari found deeply troubling. None of this proved anything. But it formed a picture that investigators could not ignore. The leading theory, one that has never been conclusively proven, but that many experts consider the most probable explanation, is that Zahari Ahmad Shah deliberately depressurized the aircraft, rendering the passengers and crew unconscious, and then flew the plane on a carefully calculated route into the southern Indian Ocean. A murder-suicide at 35,000 feet. 239 people who never knew what was happening to them. Malaysia has never officially endorsed this theory. The official position remains, the cause of the disappearance is unknown. But the evidence points in one direction. And it is a direction that a country, an airline, and 239 families have never been willing to fully face. 11 years on, the questions remain. Why did no one in air traffic control raise an alarm immediately when MH370 went silent? In the critical minutes and hours after the transponder went dark, there was a catastrophic failure of communication between Malaysian civilian and military authorities. The military was tracking the plane on primary radar and did not inform the civilian side. The civilian side launched no immediate search. Hours were lost. Why did it take 4 days for Malaysian authorities to reveal the military radar data? The world spent days searching the South China Sea for a plane that had already turned around and flown in the opposite direction. Why has the cockpit voice recorder never been found? The CVR records the last 2 hours of cockpit audio. Whatever happened in that cockpit, whatever was said, whatever sounds were made, is recorded on a device sitting on the floor of the southern Indian Ocean. Possibly forever. And perhaps the most disturbing question of all. If the leading theory is correct, if this was a deliberate act by the captain, how does an airline employ a pilot for 33 years and never detect that something is wrong? How does a man take 239 people into the sky, and bring none of them back? These questions have no answers. Not yet. In Beijing, on the morning of March 8, families gathered at the airport to meet the arriving flight. They waited. The flight didn't land. What followed for the families of the 239 people on board MH370 was one of the most prolonged, most painful experiences of grief in modern aviation history. Other disasters are devastating, but they end. There is a crash site. There are remains. There is something to bury. MH370 gave families nothing. For years, they were fed incomplete information, conflicting statements, and official silence. The Malaysian government was slow, evasive, and at times actively misleading in its public communications. Families, particularly those in China, where the majority of passengers were from, organized, protested, demanded answers. They accused Malaysia Airlines and the Malaysian government of a cover-up. Some hired independent investigators. Some paid for their own satellite data analysis. Most of them are still waiting. Grace Nathan, whose mother and Daisy was on board, has spent years advocating for a renewed search and for the truth. "We deserve to know what happened," she has said. Not knowing is the worst thing. In 2018, a private company called Ocean Infinity resumed the search on a no-find, no-fee basis. They searched over 112,000 square kilometers with an advanced fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles. They found nothing. A new search began in 2024. The ocean is being searched again. And 239 families are still waiting for someone to come home. Flight MH370 took off on the night of March 7, 2014, carrying 239 people who expected to land in Beijing. They never arrived. What happened in that cockpit in the early hours of March 8 remains, officially, unknown. The plane flew for 7 hours after its last communication. It went somewhere over the southern Indian Ocean. And it went down in waters so deep and so vast that we have not been able to find it. In the history of commercial aviation, no aircraft has disappeared so completely. No investigation has spent so much and found so little. No group of families has waited so long for an answer that may never come. MH370 is more than an aviation mystery. It is a mirror held up to the limits of human knowledge. A reminder that the ocean is deeper than our technology. That the truth can be taken away and never returned. 239 people boarded that plane. Where they are, no one knows. What happened, is still being debated. And whether the world will ever truly know the truth about Flight MH370 is a question that may outlive all of us.